So welcome to our closing session. I know it may feel like we've been here a week or more, but it feels like a great few days, and I was just saying to a colleague that it feels as though as a group of people in orchestras that are, I think we're in a better mood. I mean, it just feels as though we've kind of turned some corners. Everyone's hard at work doing the important things we need to do to be healthy and face into what's ahead of us and take all those opportunities. And it's just terrific to be together and sharing all of that work. So we're really glad you're here, and soon you get to go home. But we have this last session first. And before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsor today, Acoustics. And I think many of you know they do acoustic design in concert and recital halls. And you may know of Schermerhorn Symphony Center in Nashville, and I can tell you, having been at the opening of the new hall in St. Paul, that the work of Acoustics is just phenomenal, and that's another one of the great new concert halls of the world. I hope you'll all get a chance to experience it. And here from Acoustics today is Paul Scarborough. And Paul, where are you? Can we have you? Hey, there he is. Thank you. Thinking about this session coming up, it's actually very simple to describe. I think you can tell that one of our large themes for this year's conference has to do with relevance. And we didn't just make that up at the League. We had a town hall meeting here in Cleveland in the fall, to which we invited everyone and anyone who wanted to come, and about 90 people came from Ohio and neighboring states, and we asked them, so what's on your mind? What are the big issues, and how should we think about our conference in recognition of what you're most focused on? And over the span of a 2-hour meeting, it all kept coming back to relevance. This was discussed through the importance of relevance in messaging, in fundraising, in the repertoire we do, and the experience our public has with our orchestras. I just can't tell you enough how in 2 hours, 90 people kept saying relevance, relevance, relevance. And at our opening session the other day, we looked at this through the lens of how people in our communities experience us and how they think about their responsibilities, their concerns, and where we fit in. And this afternoon, we're going to essentially ask the same question, but we're going to ask it primarily of artists, and which is the right way to think about this, because arguably the most important thing we have to offer is the music itself. And hearing from musicians, and I know Martha from the San Diego Symphony is not herself a performer, but she's at least an honorary performing artist, because she has been, you know, an extraordinary translator and partner to individual artists, but also the whole Chicago Symphony, in thinking about how the art making there becomes part of community. So to lead us through this, we have none other than our great friend and champion, Eric Booth. And if any of you don't know Eric, he's been part of our work in many guises, and he really spearheaded and launched, if you will, the teaching artist movement in America, having taught that at Juilliard for 11 years, having written extensively about it, 5 books, and has worked with many of us in our field in the work of how to communicate effectively with our audience, and doing it in an authentic way that draws upon our artistry. Eric also has been the advisor internationally for the El Sistema movement, is working on a book that will look at El Sistema all over the world. His background's in theater, and he appears at the conferences of our peer associations in theater and opera and dance, and has played an unbelievably galvanizing role in the performing arts, and I'm really happy he's here with us today. So please join me in welcoming Eric Booth.
Wow, that was really nice. Thank you, Jesse. So here's the hardcore. A lot of hardcore people here. We knew that. For those in the back, we have some empty seats up front. I know there's a tendency to stay toward the back. It's the 6th grade impulse. that we never really get out of our systems. It's a little safer in the back, but come on up if you have a chance. Let me frame a little bit how this session is going to go. I'll give a little bit of introduction, and then we'll bring up our 4 panelists and jump in. So this is really, as Jesse was suggesting, a bookend. That the first part of the conference with that plenary session raised the issue of relevance. And I will point out in the opening session, the word relevance was said 14 times, and Jesse just snuck in another 6 in just 3 minutes. So that's really, we are really planting the seed of the theme here. And we're going to we'll have an opportunity for you to ask some questions of our panel toward the end. There will be cards available for you to write a note. When you write the question you'd like to ask, wave it in the air, and we have circulating staff who will pick it up and deliver it to us for the final chunk of time so that we can get to some of your questions. The real framing I want to provide in these first few minutes is really around these 2 words of relevance and experimentation. You may remember Michael Rote in the opening session challenged us in a really blunt way. He said, in the community engagement work that we do, in these experiments to find deeper partnerships with people who are not in the orchestra club, are we, the orchestra community, listening with the same proactive energy, the same attentiveness and open heart that we wish those people to come and attend to our music? And that issue of the listening that forms the match of partnerships is an area where I've seen significant partnering and experimentation happening in recent years. As the outsider, a theater person, complete musical bimbo, but who has worked with many orchestras on their experimenting for how they bring what orchestras love to do and are good at into really authentic and artistically rich partnerships with people who aren't used to connecting with orchestras, I get to say to you, there is way more experimentation going on in this area than you may realize. The outsider's view is that something extraordinary is happening in this field. It is universal. This research, this informal research and development lab that the orchestral field has underway has put tremendous energy into the experimenting process to discover how those partnerships can provoke new relevance, can actually provoke the very first words Jesse said of this conference, the new work of orchestras. There's a pattern to that experimentation, not just in the orchestra world, but in all the arts, that there's a lot of positive energy when you manage to launch a project, where you actually are connecting with communities in new and exciting ways, and good stuff happens, and everyone comes to love it and feel energized by that project that tends to stay out there on the periphery of the organization. And sometimes it gets extra energy fed to it, so it continues to thrive out there on the periphery of the organization. And the difficulty in every art form in the US is taking the learning from that experiment and bringing it back into the heart of the function of the organization. It cuts to the reason of why we do this experimenting. If in some secret part of your soul you believe the purpose of that experimentation is more butts in concert seats, you're in trouble. We already know it doesn't work in that direct way, but it often does work as an incidental benefit. If you believe the purpose of that experimentation is to revivify the artistic muscularity of your orchestra, you're in trouble. It is a byproduct, almost invariably. It's a byproduct, but it is not the purpose. The purpose, from my point of view, is that it is the only way to develop a certain kind of learning that is going to be required to achieve this expanding relevance to people who aren't in the orchestra club, which is 95% of Americans. The learning out here in these experiments has to come back into the function, the heart of the organization, and that's where we're struggling. This particular session looks at one of the ways in which we're going to see some examples of the way orchestras have taken the artistic learning and brought it back onto the main stage and included it, embraced it in what the orchestra offers to its wider audience as the work that we do. Imagine that the orchestra brings its best listening, and the community partner or community actually opens heart, real connections are found, and that out of that grows new artistry. That's what we're looking at. What is that new artistry, and how can we bring that right back to what happens on the main stage with the main orchestra? That's a kind of experimentation we're going to look at in this session. I have a personal axe to grind, and I don't think they can stop me at this moment, which is around the word relevance. I shouldn't challenge people in that way. For years, I've been saying the same thing, and I have another chance to say it, which is that I think we all have the same job, the same #1 priority to accomplish, and unless we're all lined up behind this and working in alignment to achieve it, we're going down. And that is to support people's capacities to make personally relevant connections inside the music. To support a wider population's capacity to be able to go inside performances of music and make a personally relevant connection. The reason I feel so strongly about this is I believe that is the thing that brings people back, and I believe that is our competitive advantage for all the other entertainment options offered cheaper, more conveniently, more stimulating, more fancy than what we've got to offer. The making of a personally relevant connection. Look at the idiom, it's a creative act. To activate the creative yearning in someone and have them be able to identify it inside the music you play so well, that is the act we must accomplish. We tend to do it by performing fantastically in halls that are conducive for that experience, but a whole lot of Americans can't do that. And we are in a field-wide exploration of all the other tools we have to support that act of consequence in humans. And thank God it is a consequential enough act that it resonates loudly enough in people that they want more of that. The experimentation that we're hearing about today is a particular way to increase the agency of that act. Not just performing even better and better and better in hopes people can get in there and make connections to it, but actually to take all this stuff we know, bring it into the creating process with our partners, and take our strengths and what we love to do and open it wider in terms of the angle of relevance and the people who are going to be able to make that personally relevant connection inside there. And side benefits, it's electrifying for all the humans involved in the art, particularly the musicians. It's empowering for the orchestra's sense of its contribution in the world, and it suddenly creates a different sense of relationship in communities. Okay, sermon is done. I want to turn to our panel, and as Jesse said, we're looking at artists. These are the people who really put themselves out there in this work to create new works, to share new kinds of work with audiences, and to see what can grow from what we do best, from our artistic sensibilities, from making stuff in response to the needs, the assets, the concerns, the musical assets of communities that are not usually seriously considered in orchestra partnerships. So this is the research and development of the future. We've been talking about that for days, and here I think it's fascinating to note that as the League's closing gesture to this conference, we go to that kind of experimentation when it comes right to the heart, which is the art. So let me introduce our 4 panelists. I'm going to just bring them up on stage with their names, and then a little later do a grossly inadequate job of introducing them. So come up on stage, Joshua Smith, Delta David Gier, Martha Gilmer, and Daniel Bernard Roumain. So one of the things that's going to happen is we're going to go back and forth between some brief presentations, really just about 5 minutes from each of our colleagues, and some video or audio clips that are examples of the work that they have been doing. So we're going to go back and forth a little bit between talking and experiencing a feel of the work. Of course, these are not highly polished examples, so kind of you're listening for what the relevance of this is. Don't expect fancy, high-gloss visuals. That's not where we're heading. And then we're going to have a little bit of discussion after our chunk of conversation before we open it to you. So let me start with Joshua Smith, principal flute of the Cleveland Orchestra, and one of the originators of the Happy Dog residency that you're about to meet.
Hi. The Happy Dog is a corner bar in the Gordon Square neighborhood, which is now positioned as an arts district. It's about 1.5 miles away from here, west of here. I first met its owner, Sean Watterson, at a friend-raising event for the neighborhood in early 2010, and he explained to me, kind of excitedly, that he presents music almost every night of the week at the bar. And so I asked him if that included classical music, and he said no, but why not? So I rounded up some colleagues a few months later just to see what would happen, and kind of to everyone's surprise, the first time we played at the Happy Dog, there were lines out the door and around the block. I couldn't find a place to park when I arrived about 20 minutes before we were supposed to start. And the events have proved so popular that Sean basically, especially because I and my colleagues don't have time to commit, to doing this on a regular basis, he has partnered with the Cleveland chapter of Classical Revolution, which does a monthly gig at the Happy Dog now. And by the way, he's continued doing even more sort of obtuse programming at the bar. So people are not only occasionally meeting orchestra members, but can sit and have a hot dog and learn about quantum physics, or meet the poet laureate of the United States. So anyway, why did I decide to do this? I was looking for ways to get classical music away from its sometimes reverential stuffiness and into places where people congregate for fun. And of course, don't misunderstand, I don't think that there's anything wrong with sitting quietly in Severance Hall listening to a great work of art. There's nothing for me more powerful than that. But so many people, you said 95% of the people don't really necessarily engage with doing that. And people, I've come to realize, are really interested in the process, not just the product of what we're doing, sort of the behind-the-scenes way of engaging with the artist. And when we're 3 feet away from people and wearing jeans, drinking beer, playing for them, but still managing to communicate directly and powerfully, the experience, I think, can be really visceral and yet accessible. The experience also, I've found, is really hard to define or categorize. It's hard to explain it. It's a little weird, and that's what makes it fun. Are we playing a concert? Not really. Is it a bar hang? Not exactly. Are we socializing? Are we doing outreach? Are people there to eat or to listen to us? And all of the answers, we're not existing in a category there. We're not rockers, certainly, but we're also not tuxedoed maestros. And I found myself hearing our music in this context in a completely new way, realizing that Ravel can rock, and so can Bach. And I love imagining the idea of someone who's not associating, constantly with what we do, having that kind of thought for the very first time. It's sparking that idea. So what people engage with, without necessarily having to sit still and pay attention for a couple of hours, is an up-close awareness that we're playing live music that can be every bit as engaged and engaging and communicative in its delivery as indie rock, which happens on the other nights at the bar. For that, it's great for the musicians who can connect directly and casually to the people who will pay to come and hear us in other venues. Perhaps, I'm sorry, in a situation where we might be competing with basketball that happens on the TV above the bar, we've learned that showmanship and communicating directly are just as important as refinement and accuracy, which are things we pay attention to at the hall. Not that we don't pay attention to them at the bar, but just that we've opened up to performing in a sort of different way. And when it all works, I've seen 20-somethings waving lighters above their heads and shouting Beethoven, which is fun. It doesn't happen at Severance Hall. So, speaking of Beethoven, and I think this is a really important point, we did do a fair amount of worrying before we started doing this about whether we should be trying to program to appeal to whoever we perceived our audience would be. I mean, should we be doing crossover stuff? Should we be, should we be playing covers? Are people going to enjoy that more? And we really decided just to draw a bright line around what we do best and do it really well. Realizing that music, when it's honestly and intently delivered, really does speak to people. We've experimented at the Happy Dog all the way up to sort of the climax of that was recording live concerts. And these were released not so long ago as a double vinyl set. And I'm proud to say that the program includes Messiaen and Arvo Pärt and Debussy and Shostakovich and even Anton Webern. So the things that presenters shy away from for fear of not selling tickets. And the record, because you can not only hear the music, but also the audience in the room attests to the fact that this music has the power to pull people right into its heart, as Eric said. Since our first experiment at the Happy Dog, Sean has been able to reverse the game quite a few times, bringing busloads of bar-goers from the bar to the hall for concerts of ours. And I think the concept blew up towards, or at least began to enable, an official Cleveland Orchestra invention of what's now a sturdy series of neighborhood residencies, which immerse the orchestra as a full group, as well as small chamber groups, and even just plain old members without their instruments, into local communities with intense schedules of everything from full-on concerts to volunteering at homeless shelters to playing chamber music at bars. I think the idea of outreach, of getting us off the stage, out of our formal wear, onto the streets has worked supremely well here. And it's making the orchestra and classical music in general part of the vernacular of the city, and I think that that can only be good. So,
well, let's hear an example. This is from. This will give you a feel for the Happy Dog, and it includes an introduction for a radio simulcast, which sort of gives you a sense of how they introduce the event to the audience. So let's go to this first clip.
I wanted to anchor this evening with one sort of really straight up arch quintessential piece of chamber music. And what we chose is a gorgeous piece by Dvorak, and we're going to do something sort of unconventional. I mean, well, duh, if it's not unconventional enough that we're playing chamber music in a bar. We're going to do 4 short sets, each of which will have a movement of the Dvorak. So if you happen to be enjoying yourself enough to have enough beer to sit here for the next 2 hours, or stay tuned for the next 2 hours on the radio. At the end of it all, you will have heard a complete performance of Dvorak E-flat major piano quartet, opus 87. Each of those 4 short sets will include a movement of the Dvorak plus a little bit of something else. We're including Benjamin Britten, Ravel, Debussy, and all of those are sort of. All of these composers are, the idea is that they'll get cozy with the movements of Dvorak and hopefully illuminate how you feel about either of the pieces that you'll hear next to each other. So we're going to start with, I've got to introduce my amazing colleagues first. Starting with Amy Lee, violin. Joanna Patterson-Zaccani on viola. Charles Bernard cello. And we're going to start with just a little overture, a march from the String Serenade by Erno Dochnani.
All right, thank you. Before we hear from Delta David Gier, the music director of South Dakota Symphony and guest conductor at many major symphonies across the US and overseas, we're going to give you some ear whiplash by giving you an audio clip of a project he's going to tell you about. So let's go to the audio clip.
Thank you. I realize as I'm listening to that, I kind of sold Jared short because he's a Native American composer, and that's kind of what you would expect a Native American contemporary piece to sound like. And his 35-minute song cycle is not about that, all beautiful as it is. But it's one of the commissions that we've had as part of our Lakota Music Project, which I'm going to describe the genesis of for you. I want to double back just quickly for you before we do that, for those of you who were not in this morning's session, because the Lakota Music Project has become the template for many, many different kinds of community engagement that we have done. Arabs and Sudanese and Somali refugees and Chinese and so on, but this is the flagship program. But we've learned a lot of things about community engagement, and I've come up with sort of 3 major rules that I now apply. There may be more added as we continue to grow. But number 1 rule is do the right thing. And that sounds simple, but it's going to look different in whatever community you're in. Doing the right thing means getting out there in the community and figuring out how you can serve. like having way too much coffee with people that you never would have thought that you would have sat down with and have conversations with, and figuring you're looking for synergy, you know, and you never know exactly where it's going to happen. Rule number 2 is, if you're going to do the right thing, you got to do it for the right reason. And that's a little trickier for us as symphony orchestras, because serving the community has very little to do, as Eric said, with butts and seats. And it doesn't really have to do with converting people into subscribers. If what you're doing by trying to serve the community smacks of self-service, then you're dead in the water to begin with. There's a lot of sensitivity to that. So if you're going to serve, then really serve and do it for the right reason, because you really want to serve. And number 3 has been more recent, and that is do the right thing for the right reason, but if you do it in the wrong way, it becomes the wrong thing. And that has to do with doubling back and staying in contact with the communities you're serving so that they can give you the feedback you know how, so you know how to create the program to go forward. I won't bore you with all the details, but in our Lakota Music Project, we found out that actually the person that was out in front emceeing our programs for the first 5 years of this program was alienating a whole sector of the population. Becomes the wrong thing. So we have to adapt, right? We have to listen. So those are my cardinal rules. So back about 10 years ago, my first year as music director of the South Dakota Symphony, moving from New York after 20 years, you know, I'm sort of taking stock of what the orchestra's done, how they're serving, and I find myself at a reception. I think it was American Cancer Society, and I'm having a conversation with this young African-American woman, and I'm saying, oh, you know, perhaps we should work together. Martin Luther King, she was actually in charge of the Martin Luther King Day activities in Sioux Falls. I said, wow, what a great point of synergy. And she's like listening to me, she's smiling, she's nodding. I said, what? She said, David, I'm a black woman living in Sioux Falls. I have no problems. If you want to talk about racial prejudice in South Dakota, it's Native American. Well, let me tell you, after 20 years of living in New York, I never thought I would ever hear those words. It's like, hello, wake-up call. So at the end of that season, we hosted a lunch for Native American leaders. And I come in, you know, with my passion, you know, ideas about how we could do things together, and I was met with total distrust. What's in it for you? Who's making money? Kevin Costner, Dances with Wolves, yada, yada, yada. No, I'm serious. I mean, these people have been taken advantage of for well over 100 years, right? And I'm backpedaling the whole time. There was one guy at the end of that luncheon that stepped up and said, you're crazy, but I think you have something I'd like to help. And we had no budget. I was the only one doing this. No staff behind me, nothing. So he said, let's go, I'll shepherd you across the state. I'll introduce you to leaders. And so we spent 2 years doing this, meeting Native American leaders, getting buy-in for this project. We didn't even know what it was going to look like. But people were excited about how the symphony could actually serve. A couple of years later, there was a pivotal moment, snowy night on Pine Ridge Reservation. Our principal string quartet, principal woodwind quintet, and a Native American drumming group, 4-hour jam session, playing music for each other. And at one point, the keeper of the drums says, you know, we're a traditional drumming group. We play the old songs. We're not a powwow drumming group. We're not a pop group. We want to pass on our tradition to the next generation. I'm like, okay, bingo. That's what we do. That's our point of connection. Out of that was born the first iteration of the Lakota Music Project. And we created a project where the drumming group and the orchestra were side by side. First half of the program, we play music back and forth for each other, have a public discussion about the role of music in our respective cultures. Second half, 2 new pieces of music written for us to play together. We never played it in the concert hall. We played it in the multicultural centers in the city. We played it on 6 Indian reservations, Crazy Horse Memorial. It's been an absolutely fabulous experience, a growing experience for all of us, and the window through which all of our engagement has opened up.
Thank you. Martha Gilmer is the CEO of the San Diego Symphony, after decades at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, many as artistic administrator.
Well, these stories are so amazing, impressive, and influential. And when I think back, for instance, you were mentioning Ravel and Dvorak. I mean, let us remember that this sampling and this idea and this cross-referencing of cultures was embedded in their music, and we play that in now our traditional halls, but we don't necessarily recall that this was new at that point. And what Dvorak came here to do is what you are now continuing, this idea of what is American music. So at the heart of it is there. And just a couple of stories. When I arrived in San Diego, my first or second week, I went to a chamber music concert in a beautiful gallery in the Museum of Art, performed by some members of the orchestra and other freelance musicians from the area. And it was, you know, I was lonely, let's be honest. I had never lived farther than 90 miles from where I was born, and now I was transported across the country. And it was the music that really lifted me up. And I was really close to the musicians, and I could see their expressions on their eyes. I could see them looking at each other. And it reminded me of the power that music has. And a woman came up to me later and says, "Oh, you're here for San Diego Symphony. You know, I was on the board, and I just used to think that was where music was. But I then came to Art of Milan, and I know this is the future. This is the future of music, not your orchestra." And I said, "Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to beg to differ with that." I think they both belong in our future. And the question that we're here to talk about is, how do you link one to the other? How do you keep that intimacy? We, several months later, hosted a concert that we called Tastings. And it was small portions of next season's works to introduce audiences to what the season would be in live music format, as opposed to on one of these little devices. And there were about 1,200 people, and the audience, the energy was fantastic. It was just rapt. And we talked about the music every 3 or 4 selections. And there was cheering, kind of like, you know, you experienced in the pub. And we had an after session with musicians, and the bars were open, and we were talking, and this woman came up to me and said, "This was fantastic." She said, I read the New York Times this past week, and it talked about awe. And I experienced awe 5 times tonight. So we had an offline conversation this week about the word awe, or the emotion. And can you manufacture it? To which I sort of answered, I don't think so, but you can get as many conditions right for it to happen. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about what is common to these experiences that we want to replicate, be it in the concert hall or be it, you know, in a community setting, et cetera. Awe, that often positive feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends our understanding of the world. Awe is the ultimate collective emotion, for it motivates people to do things that enhance the greater good. Through many activities that give us goosebumps, collective rituals, celebrations, music and dance, religious gatherings and worship, awe might help shift our focus from our narrow self-interest to the interests of the group to which we belong. Or I might say, to the groups to which we might belong. And to me, that really said what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create the opportunity for more and more opportunities for awe, for goosebumps, wherever it is that we do that. So how we take what happens in the community back, you have to look at those values. In San Diego, before I got there, and unfortunately I didn't get to experience it, there was a fantastic project funded by the Irvine Foundation called Your Song, Your Story. And I think similar to what you experienced, David, it brought musicians and cultural leaders from all kinds of ethnic diversity backgrounds, locations through the San Diego area. And it resulted in a 42-minute performance by a piece arranged by Bill Conti that reflected these songs that were collected and then turned them over to gospel groups, to Native American dancers and so forth. And one of the comments I heard back is that when the performers gathered with musicians from the San Diego Symphony, they assumed that they would be the ones giving way of their culture to the central culture, which was the orchestras. They were the ones to compromise. And what they found was a mutual respect and a give and take, bridges, as to use your word. The bridge goes both ways. And this was the most affirming aspect of this particular project, and I only wish I had been there. I experienced something of that in Chicago a few years ago. We created something called the Rivers Festival, and it was Rivers Highways of Culture and Commerce, which I will say to this date is probably the most transformative experience I've had, the ability to create that and to live through that. And we brought the music to the orchestra hall stage of many, many composers of Villalobos, music of the Amazon, music of the Mayans, Florence Price, Mississippi River Suite. And what's fascinating about Florence Price is that she musically traversed the Mississippi through the native drumming of Native Americans, through the spirituals and the music of the African Americans as the river goes farther south. Again, picking up on this culture, still through a Western prism, still through a classical symphony score, but this was the music that we were able to collect, and the list, the things that we could never get to was vast. But the one thing I will remember is that we did work in the community, in the education community. We went to 4 schools, and we developed teacher training through social studies, science, and their art and music teachers. And one of the things they did is they took the children to sit by the river, the Chicago River, of course, which was hugely influential in the development of the city of Chicago. And many of these children, even though their schools were close to the river, had never actually been to the river. And they had them sit and not speak to each other, sit in silence and experience the river, take their notes. And then they took that experience back to their music classroom, and they were asked to sit in groups and reproduce it. And many of us were there. I was there with Yo-Yo Ma and members of our education and community outreach group. And we witnessed this. And the 2 things you heard were things that were struck with mallets that were rhythmic. And then you heard things like rain sticks. And when the children described it, they said, well, the mallets, that's the sound of my feet as I walked along the river, my footsteps, or it was the sound of my heart when I was silent. And the rain sticks were either the sound of the water or the sound of the wind. And to me, this profoundly described what's at the core of music and the connection with humanity. The sound of our mother's heartbeats or being sung a lullaby, or the sound of man in footsteps and the sound of nature. And this listening, this intense listening, can influence how we then reflect our art in this world and how we build on that. And then just in closing, I would say I had a conversation, San Diego being an incredibly military town, I had the privilege of getting to know the first 2-star lieutenant of the Southwest Quadrant, female 2-star lieutenant. And she's very involved with the Midway and talking about this as a tourist attraction. And she said, we've never thought of our teaching that we've ever talked about the idea of freedom. We talk about the battles it fought and the role it played and how many people could be on board at a time, but we've never talked about freedom. And we want to do a whole training session. I said, great, and then we'll perform Shostakovich 4th Symphony, and we'll talk about what lack of freedom is. And I described the piece to her, and she said, I just got goosebumps. She felt awe. So that's, I think, at the core of what we can do.
Thank you. You just heard a redefinition of orchestras as the champions for the collective experience of awe. Daniel Bernard Roumain is composer, performer, violinist, administrator, the full package, and if you look at his website, you will find he is probably the only musician you've ever met who has had collaborations with Philip Glass, Cassandra Wilson, Bill T. Jones, Savion Glover, and Lady Gaga.
Yeah. Well, it is so wonderful to see you. I wish you could see what I see. You look beautiful in every way. I'm coming to you today having recently worked with the acclaimed actress Regina Taylor on her new play commissioned by the Goodman Theater in Chicago. At a donor reception hosted by the Hermitage Artist Retreat and Residency Program, of which both Regina and I serve as fellows, a question was posed to Ms. Taylor. Ms. Taylor, do you worry about and how do you remain relevant? She replied, without skipping a beat or missing an opportunity, that her curiosity, sincerity, and impatience keeps her and has always kept her relevant. I thought it was a brilliant response and one I wanted to share with you as it relates to our work, your individual work within your communities, and the work of our league. I want to give a brief overview of my work just this past year. I've had the opportunity to create new work for Emory Arts in Atlanta, the San Antonio Symphony, the Waterloo Cedar Falls Symphony, Gamage Auditorium, and the All-State All-Star High School Symphony of Arizona State, the Goodman Theater in Chicago, the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra, ESPN and the Disney Channel, and upcoming commissions for Rachel Barton Pine, and a very special commission for the Harris Theater, the Sphinx Virtuosi, and the Chicago Children's Chorus. I feel like I'm with family and friends. All of these collaborations represent my own continual curiosity, my sincere relationships built over time and through trust with each of these organizations, and my own impatience at the current and continual inability for the arts to truly represent all of us, the best of us, the worst of us, the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender us, the many colors and cultures of us, those of us in need for our voices, our stories, and our histories to be heard. It's really not a matter of diversity or lack thereof. It's about facts and history and our shared, fractured past and the pain of our ever-complex and dense communities, struggling for security, nourishment, a place to call home, respect, understanding, and acknowledgement through programming, presentation, commissioning, and yes, celebration, towards any community's unique, singular identity, as well as all the value, that contract, that promise of our United States of America. So for me, as a proudly Black, Haitian American composer, any commission provides an opportunity for either confrontation or conversation. I'd rather talk with you. Last year with the New Haven Symphony, I traveled over 500 miles throughout the state working with young children, high school students, and in retirement homes. We served 15,000 students. This year at the San Antonio Symphony, I composed a new work called Father Antonio's Contrapuntal Prayers for Michael. When my mother was there, Michael was Saint Michael. It had to be. She's a good Roman Catholic woman. For many of my Black friends there, Michael was Michael Brown. That's what they heard in the percussion and the brass. I don't say who Michael is. With the Waterloo Cedar Falls Symphony, I composed a new work called A Young Person's GPS for Our Orchestra, Themes and Variations on Haitian Folk Songs, which is a compositional response to Benjamin Britten's seminal work from 1946, The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, Variations and Fugue on a Theme of Purcell. So this was a way for me to take my Haitian background and reimagine, kind of signify on a work that meant so much to me in Benjamin Britten. Right now I'm writing a piece for the Chautauqua Symphony called Meditations on Raising Boys. It's for full orchestra, a chorus of men, and a chorus of boys. They only have to read to participate in the work. They will read a libretto that's been prepared by Mark Bermuthi Joseph, and they will share that pride of space and place on the stage with their local orchestra. A commission from Emory Arts in Atlanta, Georgia led to the creation of Anna Kaona, a 30-minute song cycle for singer, narrator, and ensemble. Edwidge Danticat was the narrator and the librettist. Emily Michelle was the singer and vocalist, and we had local Atlanta-based musicians. It seemed like the entire Haitian community came out. People came out who loved Edwidge's books, who loved Emmeline's records, and were very curious about new music. And finally, my work at Gamage Theater and Arizona State University in its 12th year has led to a concert last year. It was John Cage's Atlas Eclipticalis that I programmed, an extremely difficult work for young musicians, but an experience they still discuss online. I asked a student conductor to conduct the work and a local spoken word artist to provide a libretto. The creative video installation consisted of the musician's hands, feet, and instruments. As you know, we're not allowed to show young people's faces. This provided a creative opportunity. Here's a 1-minute clip.
no more. The truth is the school, and reading is for the mental. I can only see from where I am. Hope and believe in the seeds planted before my birth. Stories fill my head, traditions cursed.
And just real quickly, you know, that last piece was so special because there was over 100 musicians on stage. We did Britten, we did Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. We had a very important time. But they talk about John Cage, they talk about that particular score and their parts, and they talk about what that music meant to them and their participatory nature of that experience, helping to create that video, that young man taking over the orchestra and really leading the rehearsal of it, and how much the experience of being on that stage with all of us doing that contemporary work related to each of them individually and as a unified ensemble. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
We have one final short film for you that actually captures the feel of a full project. This was the Festival Orchestra of the Community Engagement Lab, working with a middle school community in Montpelier, Vermont. The work of art under focus was the premiere of Mannahatta by Judd Greenstein. It's based on a Walt Whitman poem about New York, and the theme was your hometown. And the way the young people in the school took this on was an investigation of food insecurity and financial insecurity in their town of Montpelier. So they explored this for a week with their teachers and their colleagues. They then worked with 2 teaching artists for a week, one working on a compositional project that you'll meet, one working on a stage set that captured their feeling about these realities in Montpelier, and it ended up in a concert that included 2 other fully performed works about cities in the world. So let's go to the film from the Community Engagement Lab.
When this project started, we wanted to answer the question, how do we know our hometown? So we commissioned a work from Judd Greenstein based on the theme of hometown and brought together some co-commissioning orchestras for a week-long planning intensive in Vermont to really explore all the ways that we could bring our communities together around the premiere.
Our goal was to celebrate the hometown, Montpelier, as a hometown. And we wanted to work with the Montpelier Main Street Middle School to this end. And so they had a unit going on about hunger and income inequality here in Montpelier. So we thought that would be a really powerful artistic starting point for this project.
I sort of thought to myself, you know, this is going to be really cool. Like, this is going to end up and it's going to be really cool. And then, of course, it was. My group worked on the silhouettes of the people. So when we went to the high school and put everything together, that was really surprising, just to sort of see how it all fit together. And then I left the room, and when I came back, the whole orchestra was ready to go and set up, and that was sort of a big moment to be like, all of these people are playing a composition that was written for my poem.
The influence, the wealth, the comfort, must it all come from money? Let us balance the scale. Must it all come from money? Let us balance the scale.
There were several distinct moments that were clear inspirations from Mannahatta, from the commissioned work that the students wanted to use. One of which was this powerful moment of silence that Judd uses towards the end of the piece, where all sound stops and then starts up again really loud. And the students loved that technique, and they used it in the final movement of Invisible Presence.
Young audience who don't spend a lot of time in concert halls and who don't know the etiquette of, you don't applaud between movements, and they were just screaming and yelling and having a great old time. And so I think you had this marvelously diverse audience, which you don't ever find in a concert hall, or that you don't find on the, the athletic fields or at the kids' plays. So I was just fascinated by who all was there.
To me, what this was an expanded community. It's not just our community of parents that I interact with, the kids' community of kids that they deal with, the musicians' community. It was an expanded community, a community that was linked in ways that it hadn't been before.
Surprised.
Empowering.
Community.
Well, since we're short on time, let me ask one question of our panel, then we'll check in and see if there's questions from the audience. But the thing that jumped out for me from your presentations were these words that are like human words. It was curiosity, it was awe, it was doing the right thing. That in fact, there's something about this stepping maybe deeper than being in music, but there's something about coming from human places. Does that seem right from being inside this sort of work?
Into what Martha was saying, her experience of awe, and trying to create the right circumstances for awe to transpire. You can't manufacture it.
Right.
Right? So one of my favorite moments from Lakota Music Project was just our third trip to Crazy Horse Memorial. And I noticed when I went out to conduct that there was this Native American artist that I don't know very well, but I met him at a couple of art fairs that was sitting there, and the whole program, tears streaming down his face. And so I went up to his name, Roger Bohr. And I went up to him afterwards and was chatting with him, and he said, I was in my studio this morning, and I wasn't going to come, and I thought, no, I have to come. And I said, why is that, Roger? He said, because what you're doing. He said, it's like the politicians, they want to make things right for us, and they're trying really hard, but it's talk. And he said, what you're doing is just creating the right space for us to be human together, and that's the whole idea. Like, we're coming together by sharing something we love, rather than focusing on what makes us different.
And like that lady said, the audience member, this experimentation is about expanding the space in which that can happen. We're good at doing that with our colleagues in the orchestra club, but this opens it wider to be human together.
Yeah.
And if you read the New York Times article about this awe study, it talks about that we are in a particularly awe deficit time, where we have a lot less of it in our lives. And I think, here he experienced that. And I think culture, music, art, dance is about the human experience. And the lack of awe also means the lack of being able to be human.
I think
a quick pause. If you have questions, wave your cards. They haven't seen any, so be evident. Daniel, sorry.
No, I was going to say what I loved about the Happy Dog presentation, and one of the things that I'm always, I understand the big general concepts of human and awe. It's really important. At the same time, and these aren't opposing views, I like the specificity of a bar. And I'm always grappling with, I wish and I always hope for, going to an orchestra, how we can continue to calibrate that experience. so that it doesn't always have to be what typically it always is. Because, see, that experience, as you were saying, your MC was unbeknownst to you, alienating. And I say this with all love and respect, and I know you hear me like family. There's so much about going to an orchestra and a traditional orchestral concert that is so, it's beyond alienating. It's absolutely frightening, absolutely unwelcoming. And I'm so excited by things like the Soundbox in San Francisco, the New World Symphony's space. There's so many things happening. You're absolutely right, Eric, in our field that is really still talking to the specificity and the wonderful rainbow of human experience that an orchestral experience can and should provide and encapsulate.
Joshua, why do you think there were lines around the block for that first Happy Dog?
Actually, I know why. We didn't try to publicize that we were going to do this, and the bar owner taped up a sign just for the neighborhood that said Cleveland Orchestra tonight. Which wasn't the truth. I mean, one of the things about this project that has been, it really actually had nothing to do with the orchestra, except that we were orchestra members. But I wasn't doing this to help the orchestra, really. I mean, I know that it did ultimately, but for me it was just a fun thing to try. But the sign worked. I think that's what did it. It was, and really, so what that means is that people realized that they would have some kind of free and fun access to us, and that was new.
Let me ask this question. David, you hinted at some of the challenges that you faced. Having lived through some of these experiences, what sort of reminders do you want to plant in people's heads about things to keep an eye out for? You mentioned getting involved with the person who isn't really an authentic representative or isn't the right representative of the group you're trying to meet. What are some other cautions?
Well, I don't think you should be afraid to get started. Like, don't, I would say just jump in and start having conversations and having too much coffee.
Yeah.
Right? But then the key word is listen. I mean, you have to double back. I think we as symphony orchestras, we create a program. It's like, oh, that's a good program. Let's do that again. But really, what you need to do is circle back with the community you're serving and ask the questions, and then listen and be prepared to respond to what they're telling you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Others, cautions to keep an ear out for?
I mean, it's all kind of connected. I think you're ultimately, I'm hearing about relationships. I mean, your relationship with the bar owner, your relationship with this young woman. It sticks out in my mind, your relationship with a city, even a new place. And I think relationships, especially relationships over time, really do establish trust. And once you have trust, you can really affect change. I mean, I think everybody in this room, I think about all the myriad of relationships that happen at these conferences, which for me feel like a family reunion. And I think, the good and bad in that always means that, with the right relationships, you can move mountains. You can do just about anything. And so I think, as I was saying before, unfortunately for my generation and sometimes younger generations, the conversations online don't always translate to conversations offline. In fact, they become very confrontational. And so I really do believe in this power of being able to, it's just a simple idea. Can you sit down with someone and have a drink, break bread? Can you really start there and then try to build the dream and make the reality?
I think you asked specifically about whether there are cautions, and I mean, at the risk of sounding really obvious, I think that one of the things that we have to be careful about is hiding behind, oh no, that can't work, just because it hasn't, there are many reasons why things shouldn't work, but they can if we want them to.
And also I would say, it's an evolution. You listen, you change. You listen, you adjust. It isn't going to come out full blown. And we are talking about some infused dollars into this. So the caution and the risk taking is something you have to break through. You just have to suspend that judgment for a while so that you keep going and try things and learn from it all. And it'll go in a path like the river. It'll go in a path you don't expect.
We're just about at the end of the time, so I'm going to do a little lightning round of just 15 seconds. When you think of this kind of work projected forward, what is one image of something you can imagine it could look like, or it could be, or that would be of particular interest to you? If this body of work we're describing 5 years from now has gone really well, what is something we might see?
I have a 6-year-old son. One of the things that's most precious to him is Tom Brady's jersey. And I hope, and this isn't trite, I really look forward to the time when he will love his Boston Symphony Orchestra, his New York Phil, his San Francisco, his Waterloo, his Chicago Symphony Orchestra shirt, jersey, whatever that is. Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah.
I cherish the thought of this conversation 5 years from now, because the image that immediately came to my mind was a vast tapestry, because it's going to look different for every orchestra in every community. And the people that are served, yes, we can serve similar communities in different cities and so on and so forth, and we can share that information, but just hearing reports back I mean, we've got a sampling of it here, and it's beginning, like Jesse was saying, like this work is it's on its way, you know? So 5 years from now, wow, yeah.
Because I always think of, you know, strings leading back and going out, and it all being woven, and that it's not just San Diego, but it stretches to North Dakota, to Florida, to Canton, Ohio, to
Not
whatever.
South Dakota?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was branching north.
Yeah.
I was seeing you were going for
So you went through it.
I hate projecting into the future.
Then don't.
But I like the idea, again, of imagining that we have built relationships with people who wouldn't ordinarily have come to the orchestra, and that have now been somehow exposed. And one of the greatest things that I've learned out of this, it's a really simple thing, but it makes an enormous difference that people have had an actual conversation with me, and then they come to the hall and they perceive the entire experience completely differently. And so I guess I look forward to just doing more of that.
Well, thanks to our panelists, I'll point out, you noticed in a number of the stories they told a brave pioneer who stepped forward, in many cases alone, to initiate this work. These are the pioneers, and we have pioneers also in the house. It is taking that kind of courage to boldly go into conversations you haven't been in before, high quality listening, and discover the strengths that both have in this common ground. And I'll just end on a note, a word you're going to want to take away with you in relation to the word awe. The word horripilate, write it down, means to make your hair stand on end. So this is the horripilating field of the world, and these are its pioneers. Thank you. Come, let's.
There couldn't be a better way to bring our conference toward its close. And you know, we've had wonderful speakers throughout this conference, and wonderful questions from everyone here. But I do want to underscore how things change when we hear from the creative performers, artists in our field. And this is like a note to me and to all of us at the League to continue and to increase the participation of musicians and composers and all manner of creative people that are giving shape to the future of our musical work and our artistry. So again, a big thank you to this terrific panel.